Hi everyone, this is DKeys, bringing you a build guide to the Staff Elementalist following the April 15th, 2014 feature patch. Now, while the skills and traits that a Staff Elementalist will use haven't really changed all that much, the changes to runes and sigils have enabled a couple of very interesting gear choices for Staff Elementalists. Let's start with the traits. While there are a few viable builds for PvE Staff Elementalists, I find that the 6-6-0-0-2 trait distribution does what I want it to do for Staff Elementalist in PvE. I use this for a lot of trash clearing, and so I like having the improved AoE from Arcana, as well as the extra vulnerability from trading deep into air. Now, in the fire line, we take Internal Fire for a 10% damage modifier while in Fire Attunement, and at the Master level, we take Pyromancer's Alacrity for a 20% cooldown reduction on those fire weapon skills. Now, Pyromancer's Alacrity has a very good interaction with the Grandmaster trait Persisting Flames, which increases the duration of fire fields, which in this case would be Lava Font and Burning Retreat, and also adds Fury to blast finishers that you put down in any fire field. How these two interact for this particular build is that this enables you to keep a Lava Font up for 100% of a battle time, which means that you'll have very good, very steady DPS against your targets. Now the Grandmaster Minor trait, Burning Rage, is yet another damage modifier. This one is 10% against burning foes. While a Staff Elementalist has relatively limited access to burning, this works very well in group settings where you might have a Guardian or a Ranger or an Engineer that will also be applying burning. In air, take Bolt to the Heart for another damage modifier. This one is 20% additional damage against foes with 33% health or less. At the Master level, take Arcane Lightning, which will grant 150 Ferocity at level 80 for 15 seconds after you use an arcane skill. This trait will refresh every time you use an arcane skill, so your timing for your arcane skills can be a little generous, though you cannot stack the duration of these by using 2 arcane skills in a row. The Grandmaster Minor, Weak Spot, will enable you to put a decent amount of vulnerability on your foes. For normal monsters, you're looking at about 7 to 8 stacks of vulnerability, and on bosses, you're looking at about 3 to 4. And while that's not a lot, it helps contribute to group DPS. For the last trait in the air line, you have several options. A good defensive trait is Zephyr's Focus. This will proc when you're casting Meteor Shower to help recharge your endurance bar faster. If you feel that you don't need Zephyr's Focus, you can take Tempest Defense, not necessarily for the defensive aspect either. What it will enable you to do is have yet another damage modifier, this one 20%, when your foe is stunned or knocked down. Now this doesn't just apply to stuns or knockdowns either. This also applies to Frostbow 5, so what you can do when starting a battle is stack Might, put down a Frostbow, and then use Frostbow 5 to freeze your foe for 5 seconds, thus granting yourself that 20% damage modifier for 5 seconds, which will enable you to get off an Ice Storm, a Frost Fan, and probably a Lava Font as well. If you'd like something slightly more defensive, you could take Quick Glyphs. This would help reduce the cooldown on some skills you may use on occasion, such as Glyph of Elementals or Glyph of Elemental Power. It has its uses, and it's another thing to keep in mind. If you want to try a different build, say your group is capping on Vuln, you can take 2 out of Air Magic, still used to the old system, and put them into Earth Magic for Stone Splinters. This is a 10% damage modifier when within 600 range of your target. Or if you don't want to bother with micromanaging Arcane Lightning, you can take another 10 out, put it into Water Magic, and get Vital Striking, which is a Scholar's type bonus. The changes to sigils, runes, and gear in this update have left staff elementalists with two viable options for their gear. The first is the classic Berserkers, Assassins, or Berserkers Assassins mixed armor with superior runes of the Scholar. Now previously, the effective power difference between Berserkers and Assassin's armor was about 0.5%. Now with the change to Ferocity, which has resulted in a reduction in crit damage, the difference between Berserkers and Assassins is closer to 0.25%, which you'll never see because of the RNG on weapon damage. Scholar's runes are still the highest personal effective power option in PvE, and still provide power and ferocity, as well as the 10% damage modifier when your health is above 90%. Now, note that this particular armor is most effective in organized groups where you have others providing might and vulnerability for your staff elementalist. Since your staff elementalist is just a powerhouse, I recommend putting additional damage modifier sigils on your weapon. Now that the staff has 2 sigil slots, I would recommend Force and Night for nighttime dungeons, and Force and Slaying for daytime dungeons, or if you would rather not have so many staves, Force and Accuracy. Now, this setup also requires that others are providing that might, and so that Force and Accuracy isn't necessarily the most optimal choice in some settings. In those cases, you'd want to go with a Force and Strength. On top of this particular setup, a staff elementalist can more or less do pretty well with Berserkers or Assassin's armor with superior runes of strength. These runes got a massive buff during the update and provide power and 45% might duration. On a staff elementalist, with the 6 or so might that he or she provides through blast finishers, this is a little helpful, but kind of makes scholars more optimal in more settings. But if you are pugging or if you're out in open world, then this particular setup really shines, especially when you pair it with a staff that has a sigil of Force or Night, as well as a sigil of Strength, which will give you might on critical. Now the base duration of this might is only 10 seconds, but when you add the 45% duration from your runes, as well as the 10% duration from trading into Arcana, this means each of those stacks of might is over 15 seconds. And since the staff elementalist hits so frequently, it means you'll be sustaining about 10 to 15 stacks of might during your normal DPS rotation, which is nothing to sneeze at. On top of your primary damage weapons, you'll want to have a staff with a sigil of Perception if you use Berserker's armor and a staff build that is low in air, that is 0 or 2 points. If you have a different armor set than Berserkers, or if you use trait distributions that have 4 or 6 points in air, you will want to stack Bloodlust. Now, since I play multiple weapon sets, I have Bloodlust sigils on other weapons so that I can stack quickly and then get back to staff for DPS. You'll also want to put a sigil of either Bloodlust or Perception, whichever you prefer, on your Trident. This will enable you to swap off your stacking weapons and keep those stacks, which I'm not sure if that's intended mechanics, but if I could think of this possible scenario months ago, I would hope the developers could as well. For your trinkets, you still want Berserker's trinkets of the best rarity that you can afford. If you have Berserkers or mixed armor, you can throw in a couple of precise infusions to bump your elementalist up to that next % of crit chance. After that, you'll want to go with power infusions. For Assassin's armor, you'll want to just go with power infusions so that you don't stack too much crit chance. Once you add in Fury, banners, possibly Spotter, and your food, an Elementalist can still get to around 90 or even 100% crit chance. Not much has changed in terms of what skills an Elementalist should use. The best heal for a staff Elementalist is still Arcane Brilliance, so that you have one additional blast finisher to use in your fire fields, and also so that you can keep your buff up from Arcane Lightning if you are traded 20 into air. Between Arcane Brilliance and Arcane Wave, you will be able to keep this buff up 100% of the time, which is a nice boost to your DPS. If you need condition removal, take Ether Renewal so that you don't have to swap out of fire and tank your DPS. Or if you are fighting from a range, take Glyph of Elemental Harmony for a slightly better heal if you need it. If you don't feel like you'll need a heal at all, I would highly encourage you to stick with Arcane Brilliance for the blast finisher, though you could also take Signet of Restoration for the passive heal. Two skills that should never leave your bar are Signet of Fire for the additional precision, and Arcane Wave for the blast finisher and for keeping Arcane Lightning up. The last slot is entirely up to your choosing. If you'd like an offensive option, Conjure Frostbow is very useful, as Frostbow 4 and 3 are decent DPS, and if fighting a large enemy and it doesn't have any Defiance on it yet, you can use Deep Freeze to keep it chilled for 5 seconds, enabling you and your party to safely DPS. Other options for this last skill slot, if you want something more defensive, are Arcane Shield, which will save you from a couple of attacks, say while casting Meteor Shower or while fiery rushing, or possibly Armor of Earth now that it has a smaller cooldown. The protection and stability from this can be nice against either multiple small hits or against bosses that might knock you back or interrupt your attack chain. Other options are Mist Form, if you want another defensive skill, or Glyph of Elemental Power to cast an Earth before you swap to Fire to keep enemies crippled so that they don't move out of your lava font, or Meteor Shower. Also, Conjure Lightning Hammer can be situationally useful for blinds, though I would recommend Glyph of Storms over that so you can still benefit from the staff DPS. When cast in Earth Attunement, Sandstorm will blind up to 5 enemies and do a decent amount of damage. The damage from Ice Storm and Lightning Storm pales in comparison to Frostbow, so I would still recommend Frostbow for your offensive option. If you're in open world PvE, you could also use Signet of Air for the move speed bonus, or Glyph of Lesser Elementals for a face tank. For your elite, I would recommend Conjure Fiery Greatsword for most dungeoning and PvE settings, even though ANET tweaked its performance so that Fiery Rush can no longer be used with blinks and other teleports. Fiery Rush, as well as Fiery Whirl, still do very good damage when used against a wall, as you can still stack the AoEs and the hits. Firestorm is still a very good long-lasting AoE as well. If you can't use Conjure Fiery Greatsword because there are no walls handy, I would recommend using Glyph of Elementals. When cast in Fire or Air Attunement, the Elemental is a good boost to your DPS, while when cast in Earth Attunement, the Earth Elemental is a very good face tank that can survive multiple blows from Archdiviner. Since you are a staff Elementalist, one last thing you could use is Tornado. If you cast Meteor Shower and then immediately follow that up with transforming into a tornado, your meteors will get a decent boost to their damage. Once the Meteor Shower has finished, you'll want to transform out again so that you can get back to putting down lava fonts and throwing fireballs. The optimal food to use for a given build is highly dependent upon the trait distribution and armor selection. For builds that are high in air, that is 4 or 6 points in air, and use either Berserker's armor or a Berserker's Assassin split, I would recommend Plates of Truffle Steak. Previously, This food was completely outclassed by the butternut squash soups because the soups would provide 10% critical damage. Now that these soups only provide 4.5%, truffle steaks have become competitive for some builds. The cheaper version of truffle steak is steak and asparagus. For builds that are high in precision and use assassin's armor, I would recommend curry butternut squash soup. The rationale behind this is that these builds have around 90 to 95% critical chance already, so the additional 5% chance from the soup will get you very close to 100% chance, which means you are getting the most use out of your critical damage. In some situations, I would also recommend either candied dragon rolls or dragon's breath buns. For builds that are low in precision, that is only 2 in air, I would go with curry butternut squash soup, or its cheaper alternatives, just normal butternut squash soup or minotaur steaks. For your utility consumables, I would recommend dungeon potions whenever appropriate. These 9 or 10% damage modifiers completely outclass the sharpening stones and other options you might have, though if you cannot use a slaying potion, say for AC, I would recommend oils for berserker gear or for builds that are low in precision, and sharpening stones for the other 2 armor types, well, the berserker's assassin split as well as assassin's armor, or builds that are high in precision. Another option is Scale Venom. Since the Staff Elementalist hits many targets with its AoEs, it can apply Scale Venom properties to many enemies at once. That weakness can really help in higher level fractals, and if your group is low in vulnerability, the 10% chance of applying vulnerability can help in those situations. Other items that you might want to think about carrying a few around are Ash Legion spy kits and harpy feathers. Even though they're on a 1-minute cooldown each, they can help you get to and get difficult to reach skill points that involve like running past enemies, and can be used in a pinch to either de-aggro or hide yourself on a panel or while doing switches in the Dredge Fractal. Another thing you might want to carry around is fire elemental powders. I still have a lot left over from when they were spammable, and this can be a nice little DPS boost against difficult bosses. Same goes for the ogre pet whistles. A Staff Elementalist's DPS rotation is relatively simple and mainly uses skills from the fire attunement. Your auto attack, Fireball, is a ranged attack that will hit up to 3 foes where it lands, or when it hits your primary target. Lava Font is an AoE that can hit up to 5 foes that stand in it. Without persisting flames, it will tick 4 times, and with persisting flames, it will tick 6 times. When it ticks all 6 times, it is a very good source of damage and should never be neglected in your DPS rotation. Your third skill, Flame Burst, will apply burning to your target. This is useful for activating the Fire Grandmaster minor trait, Burning Rage, which is a 10% damage modifier against burning foes. Burning Retreat is a dodge skill that will put down a fire AoE that is rectangular. Foes standing in this field will also have burning applied to them. Like Fiery Rush on a Fiery Greatsword, you can use Burning Retreat into a wall to stack up the AoEs and do more damage to your target. Finally, Meteor Shower is a large AoE that can hit a very high number of targets because each of these meteors acts as its own AoE, and each meteor can hit up to 5 targets. In water, even though I wouldn't recommend these for most combat applications, you have 2 water fields that can be used for healing, as well as 1 ice field in frozen ground that can be used for a frost aura if you happen to want it, or in the Grawl Shaman fractal fight, you can use it on the boss to slow him down so that he doesn't reach the captives as quickly. This is probably one of the best uses for this skill in PvE. In air, you have Windborne Speed, which applies swiftness to you and nearby allies, and is also impacted by Blasting Staff, and Static Field, which will stun foes that cross it in case you have foes chasing you, or can be used as a combo field for swiftness as well. Also, if you use a staff while running, you can use Gust to push back a foe without putting you in combat. Finally, in Earth, we have Eruption, which is a blast finisher. Most of the time, you'll want to start combat in Earth Attunement and put down Eruption, and then follow it up with a Lava Font so that you can stack Might on yourself. You also have Magnetic Aura, which will reflect projectiles for 5 seconds, and Unsteady Ground, which is a mini line of warding which can be used while running, and if foes are stopped by it, you will not be put into combat. Finally, there is Shockwave, which will immobilize foes, but will put you in combat if you hit things. The Staff Elementalist DPS rotation does not make use of many of this weapon skills on the staff, but does require the Elementalist to be aware of where they are in their rotation so that they don't interrupt a skill and reduce their DPS. To start off, cast an Eruption in Earth Attunement, then swap to Fire and place a Lava Font down underneath your foe. Then immediately start channeling Meteor Shower since Lava Font's cast time is so short, and once Meteor Shower has finished, cast Arcane Brilliance and then another Lava Font. Auto attack 4 times, and then place another Lava Font down since it will be off cooldown. Then auto attack 4 more times and another Lava Font. Then auto attack twice, and once you see your Arcane Lightning buff start to go away, cast Arcane Wave to refresh that buff. Then it should be about another 2 fireballs before your Lava Font is up again. Then, of course, cast that Lava Font, 4 more fireballs, Lava Font again, and then your Meteor Shower should be up. Meteor Shower, Arcane Brilliance, and repeat this rotation until your enemies are dead. You can improve the DPS on this rotation in a few settings. If your enemies do not have Burning, you can replace 1 fireball per set of 4 with Flame Burst. Or, if you are against a wall, or if you need to dodge anyway, you can replace 1 fireball with Burning Retreat. Also, if you're using Frostbow, you can put down a Lava Font, then conjure Frostbow, use Frostbow 4 and 3, and then drop the Frostbow, and if using Fiery Greatsword, stack Might, drop Fiery Greatsword, and then engage the boss. And that's it for Staff Elementalist. Thanks for watching.